Okay, so basically this part is for people who don't know what a piston valve is or who don't know how they work. And for people who do know how they work, just skip forward. But yeah. So basically, piston valve only has one moving part, which is the piston. Um, how they work is you have the Schrader valve or whatever valve you want. So you have your fill valve here, and on normal coaxial piston valve, you would have a separate exhaust valve to vent the air in the back. But on this build, we'll just be using the Schrader because it's such a small build. So basically, when air goes in here, it pushes the piston forward, which seals the barrel because there's more force pushing on the piston on this side than on that side because there's more area here. And the piston sealing face is just going to be made of like neoprene or soft rubber or something. And the air leaks around the piston because it's not going to be a perfect seal and fills up the chamber, which is here. And then when you exhaust the air, here, this shows a picture of the piston in the exhausted position. Uh, the piston slides back and lets all the air from the chamber here through the barrel, which propels your projectile. I started by first shoving a wet paper towel down the copper tube until it was about an inch from the end. I then poured hot glue in the tube to make a piston about 1 inch long. I then took my piston and scraped one of the rough ends on this countertop. This was so that I could make the face smooth and flat. To make the sealing face, you could use this syringe, but I just used some regular green rubber. I then screwed my sealing face to my piston with that tiny screw. I made sure they were perfectly centered, because if they're not, it won't work. I then scruffed up the inside of both sides of the copper tube so that the epoxy had something to grip onto. I did the same for the barrel. I cut the Schrader valve so it was about an inch long because originally it was way too long. Before I epoxied everything together, I laid everything out and made marks on all the different parts of the gun so I could know where to epoxy them. As you see, I have the Schrader valve first, and then I marked the Schrader valve near the top, then where the piston is going to slide back to, and finally the barrel. And near the end, you can see I marked the barrel with some Sharpie so I could know where to glue that in. Between those two little marks on the barrel is where the epoxy will be. That's also where I filed the barrel. To both keep the epoxy from sliding down the pen tube while epoxying, and to also keep the barrel and Schrader valve centered, I made a little hot glue ring around the Schrader valve and barrel and slid that into the copper tube. This created a movable and airtight seal-ish that would stop the epoxy from sliding down into the tube. I did this for the Schrader valve and the barrel. When I removed the Schrader valve with hot glue, it looked like this. I later trimmed a little off so that the epoxy would have a little bit more area to stick to the tube and hence be a bit stronger. When I epoxied my barrel in, I actually used the piston I made as a guide. I slid the barrel down until it was around the screw, and that way it stayed perfectly centered inside the gun. Then I mixed up some epoxy and glued the barrel in. I pushed my piston out to see if the barrel was centered. Luckily it was. If yours isn't, well, you're screwed. I made sure to grease up the piston a lot with silicone oil. If you use something like WD-40, it'll eat up the rubber.
Nom 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 nom.
After shoving my piston down into the gun, I thoroughly cleaned the ends so that the epoxy could stick to the tube. I put epoxy on my Schrader valve with the hot glue on it, then shoved it down the tube until it reached the mark I'd made. After letting the epoxy cure for about 12 hours, I found a little pen cap that fit perfectly over the gun. I hot glued a little screw inside to press the Schrader valve and drilled a few holes in it so that it could vent the air. You can fire this gun at whatever pressure seems safe to you, but I highly recommend you keep it under 300 psi. Be careful, you might shoot your eye out, kid. Always wear your protective eye gear.